In light of everything that has gone on over the past year and even over the past week, I thought it would be important to quickly go over the basics. In the United States and in most of the world, we live under an economic system called capitalism. And capitalism is a system where the banks and the factories and the major industries and the centers of economic power, the big box stores, the oil wells, the factories, the airlines, the means of communication, the means of transportation, the mines, the steel mills, the meat packing facilities. All of these things are the private property of owners. A small group of people own the means of production, the major centers of economic power, the commanding heights of the economy. They own these things. And they operate them in order to make a profit from their ownership. We don't have houses because people need a place to live. We have houses so that landlords and banks can make money from them. We don't have food so people can eat it. We have food so big box stores and agribusiness corporations can make money from it. The means of production, the major centers of economic power, are privately owned by owners who utilize them to make profits. That is capitalism. The system of production organized for profit, private ownership of the means of production, where the economy functions in order to make profits, right? Frederick Engels said that capitalism is a system in which the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital. Things don't get done under capitalism unless there is a mechanism for a capitalist to make profits from it. Marx referred to the general law of capitalist accumulation, meaning that a capitalist makes profits, which he then reinvests to make more profits, which he then reinvests to make more profits. And the rule of capitalism is expand or die. If a capitalist is not expanding and accumulating more capital to reinvest in order to make more capital, to reinvest in order to make more capital, if he doesn't do that, he goes out of business and becomes absorbed by another capitalist entity. That capitalism is a system where the maximization of profits is the guiding force of the economy. Production is organized to make profits. The means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital. Or as Mao Zedong, the founder of the Chinese Revolution, put it, he said, capitalism is a system of profits in command. Profits in command. And the reason that capitalism is a problematic system is because what is profitable for people who own means of production is not always and usually not for the benefit of society. War is very profitable for capitalists. They make lots of money from war. War means that they get to sell tanks and guns and bombs. War means that rival capitalists and countries that might be breaking free from their system or countries that might simply be competing with them get beaten down and destroyed. War is very profitable for capitalists. Prisons have turned into a mechanism for making profits for capitalists. They have private prisons in a number of states where capitalist corporations make money from locking people in jail. Opioid addiction is a mechanism for making profits. There was a huge effort by big pharma companies to push doctors to overprescribe opioids. Why? Because they wanted to sell more pills and get more people hooked so they could make more profits. The capitalist is always looking to pay the worker as little as he can possibly get away with. Why? The less he pays them, the more money he gets in profits. The capitalist is constantly looking to drive the worker to produce as much as they possibly can. Why? Because the more the worker produces, the more profits the capitalist can make. Capitalism is a system of production for profits, and the capitalist is constantly constantly looking to maximize his profits. And the capitalist system has a built-in problem. And the built-in problem of the capitalist system is that because the capitalist is constantly driving to maximize his profits, he is constantly looking to reduce the cost of labor. He wants to pay the worker as little as he can. He wants to make the worker that he hires as replaceable as possible. He wants to replace human labor with machinery and develop technology so that fewer workers are needed. And the more that the capitalist does this, the more that the capitalist eliminates workers from the means of production, the more that the capitalist drives the wages of the worker down, the fewer products he can sell, because the worker is also the consumer. And when the capitalist drives down the cost of production, he is driving down the purchasing power of the worker. And the lower people get paid, the lower the wages of the people, the worse the living conditions, the more unemployment there is, the less products the capitalist can sell. And so there is a constant contradiction between, on the one side, the drive of the capitalist to decrease the living standards of the worker and pay the worker as little as possible, eliminate the worker from the means of production. And on the other hand, the drive of the capitalist to sell as much as he possibly can and maximize sales of his products. And the capitalist has this contradiction, and at the end of the day, the wages paid to the worker are never enough to buy back the product that he produces. The wage of the worker, the working class in production, is never paid enough with which they can buy back all that they produce. That there is a constant contradiction. And this is the problem of overproduction. The problem of overproduction. And it leads to cyclical crises in the means of production. That there are frequently situations where there is a glut, where the market is so full of products, that people are hungry. People become homeless because there are too many houses. This happened in 2008. The capitalists were building houses, the capitalists were selling houses, but the American working class could not afford to keep buying houses at the same rate. So Alan Greenspan and the Federal Reserve and U.S. Congress did all things they could to deregulate lending to try and keep Americans buying houses. Even though America's living standards had gone down, the American worker was much poorer than before, the rate of household debt was through the roof, they had to keep Americans buying houses. But at the end of the day, it just didn't work. Americans could not afford to keep buying houses. And pretty soon, there were homes foreclosed all over the United States. Pretty soon, the housing bubble burst. And why were so many Americans homeless? Why did so many Americans in 2008 spend their Christmas holiday living in a tent in the freezing cold? Why were there tent cities set up outside of Nevada? Why were there empty foreclosed homes all across America? Why did this happen? Why did the housing bubble burst? Because there are too many houses. People became homeless because there are too many houses. Why? Why does the government of the United States purchase huge amounts of milk and cheese from American farmers, and with that milk and cheese, dump it out or bury it? Did you know that? The American government, in order to subsidize the American farmer, buys millions of dollars worth of milk from American farmers and millions of dollars worth of cheese, and it takes that milk and it dumps it out. And it takes that cheese and it buries it. Why? It's to keep the price of milk and cheese and dairy products high, to inflate it. Why? Because if not, the American agricultural sector would collapse. And people would be hungry because there is too much food. This is the irrational system of production for profit. Production organized for profit is a highly irrational system. The system of production for profit is not rational. And right now, the capitalism that we live under in the United States has moved to a stage of monopoly. American corporations, corporations in Britain, corporations in France and Germany, big banks, big, huge multinational corporations, they don't simply operate on a domestic level. They don't only make profits here in the United States. They rake in super profits from all across the planet. We live in a world dominated by a few huge multinational corporations. Big international corporations dominate the world. And from dominating the planet, they make super profits. And all across the developing world, countries that should be able to rise from poverty and should be able to develop their own industries and their own manufacturing and should be able to have their own economy are kept in poverty. They are kept as captive markets for these huge multinational corporations, for these huge international bankers. And this is called imperialism. This is capitalism in its monopoly stage. Lenin described it as imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, where the capitalists and bankers, and particularly finance capitalists, but also the industrial corporations, dominate the global economy. And they keep countries in Africa and Asia and Latin America poor so that Wall Street and London can stay rich. This is capitalism in its monopoly stage, or imperialism. Imperialism is not a verb. It is not an action. It is not a policy. Imperialism is a system. It is a system, a global system of monopoly capitalism, where a few big multinational corporations and bankers dominate the world, keeping the world poor, keeping countries from raising their heads, keeping people in poverty, so that they can maintain their monopoly. Wall Street and London are keeping the world poor so that they can stay rich. And this is capitalism in its monopoly stage. It is imperialism. When the British Empire went to India, the people of India who'd been weaving and having looms for years had all their looms burned down by the British. And the British forced them to import their cloth from Britain. The people of India had been boiling water to make their own salt for years. But the British came and outlawed that and said that they had to buy their salt from British corporations. This is imperialism, a system where a few multinational corporations dominate the world. It is capitalism in its monopoly stage. It is imperialism, the global system of banking and finance capital based in the West, dominating the global economy, preventing countries around the world from raising themselves up out of poverty. That is the system that we live under. And that is the system that for a long time, while it was keeping people poor in Africa and Asia and Latin America, it kind of made a deal with some of the workers here at home. Democracy of labor. Where, yes, the USA bombed Vietnam and killed millions of people. Yes, the USA bombed Korea and killed millions of people. Yes, the USA carried out ugly coups and backed up brutal military dictatorships in South America and in Africa. But here at home, there was a comfortable layer, a comfortable middle class of well-paid auto workers, steel workers, meat packers, folks who made decent enough wages that they were comfortable enough to be loyal to the empire. And they would get their TV sets and they would get their refrigerators. But because they had that, they would wave the flag, they would support the wars, they would oppose civil rights, they would, there was a layer of well-paid white workers in the United States they called the aristocracy of labor. That there was enough super profits being made by the huge multinational corporations that they could afford, to give a little bit to certain layers of the American working class to keep them compliant. They could buy them off with a few crumbs. They could buy off a section of the working class. And that was the order of imperialism. But now, in the aftermath of the computer revolution, we are now entering a new phase of imperialism. A phase where they no longer need an aristocracy of labor. They no longer need an aristocracy of labor to maintain their empire. The computer revolution has gotten them into a situation where the huge multinational corporations no longer need that comfortable white middle class of well-paid industrial workers with the white picket fence and the car and the 2.5 children. They don't need that any longer. They don't need it any longer. The imperialists no longer need that comfortable aristocracy of labor in the homeland. And so they are in the process of dissolving the labor aristocracy and lowering the first world countries to the level of the developing world and driving the whole world deeper and deeper into poverty, so that small clique of international bankers and global monopolist corporations, that ultra-rich ruling class, can dominate the world. And they are transitioning the first world countries, which used to be prosperous at the expense of the developing world, where they used to maintain a comfortable middle class in order to stabilize things. They are transitioning the United States into a low-wage police state. That is the situation that we are in. And Donald Trump and some of the right-wing or the new right movements, they emerged as an attempt by some of the lower-level capitalists to fight to maintain that labor aristocracy. Some of the capitalists who are losing out as the USA transitions to a low-wage police state, part of a huge multinational system, an open international system, as Anne-Marie Slaughter in the Hillary Clinton State Department described it. As the United States transitions in that direction, you had lower-level capitalists like Betsy DeVos, like Sheldon Adelson, like Bernie Marcus, that were supporters of Donald Trump because they were trying to prevent the process of demolishing the American middle class. Right? They were trying to bring back the 1950s, make America great again. But it didn't work. They lost. And Biden, who represents unity between the American capitalist class and the European capitalist class, Biden, who represents a more global outlook, Biden is victorious. And the revolt of the lower-level capitalists that were trying to preserve the past and trying to hold on to the existence of the labor aristocracy, that revolt was put down. And their attempted insurrection at the Capitol was an absolute disaster. And at this point, the more globally oriented, imperialist, monopolist corporations, they have the upper hand. This is the situation that we are in as a country. But what is the answer? The answer is called socialism. The answer is a system where production is not organized for profits. Socialism is a system where the banks and the factories and the major industries and the centers of economic power are organized to serve public good and not the profits of a few owners. Socialism is a system where the banks, factories, and industries are forced to work in the interests of the people. Socialism is a system where profits are not in command, but rather there is a state central plan. Socialism is when society as a whole, represented by the working class, on behalf of society as a whole, takes control of the means of production. And the banks, factories, and industries become public property and are then reorganized for the benefit of society overall. That is what socialism is. Socialism is the negation of capitalism. It is when a country breaks free from capitalism and reorganizes the economy to serve public good and not profits. The first country to ever have socialism was the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, they fought 15 countries that invaded them after their socialist revolution. They fought off crippling economic sanctions where they were blocked from importing medicine and aid. In the 1920s, the Soviet Union was subject to a lot similar things to what Venezuela faces right now. Right? I mean, the blockades and famines. But in 1928, Stalin, who was the leader of the Soviet Union, he created 5-year economic plans. And he mobilized the country to build. And under the leadership of the Soviet Communist Party, the USSR went from being an agrarian, impoverished country with massive illiteracy to being an industrial superpower. By 1936, the Soviet Union was producing more steel than any other country in the world. They electrified the entire country. The whole country was electrified. They built the world's largest hydroelectrical power plant, the Dnieper Dam. They wiped out illiteracy in the country. They raised people who had been living in rural huts and villages to living in modern housing units, apartment buildings with electricity, with running water. They achieved tremendous economic miracles by reorganizing the economy to serve public good and not profits. The USSR became a global industrial superpower. It built an oil industry and started exporting oil. It invented LED lights. It made dramatic achievements for the population. And at the time, everybody knew this. Everybody knew that the Soviet Union, during the Great Depression in the 1930s, when the rest of the world was having a Great Depression and people were hungry and starving, the Soviet Union was speeding ahead economically. This is undisputed fact. This is basic economic data that you have never been told and you have been lied about. You've been told your whole life, communism never worked anywhere, never achieved anything. Oh boy, that's simply not the case. The USSR rapidly industrialized, rapidly raised living standards. Not only did they industrialize and produce huge amounts of steel and huge amounts of electricity and power plants, not only did they raise millions of people up out of poverty, not only did they build huge universities and start churning out engineers and scientists, but they also had amazing breakthroughs in the arts. The best films of the era were being produced in the Soviet Union. Sergei Eisenstein, the father of the montage, made amazing cinematic breakthroughs. Some of the best gymnasts and ballet performers were in the Soviet Union. The most cutting-edge music of Shostakovich was being produced as they were making breakthroughs in music. All kinds of great things happened under the leadership of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union created a society where women had a higher level of equality than they'd ever had in Russia's history. Women became electrical engineers. Women became leaders of the military. It was amazing what socialism achieved while the rest of the world was having a Great Depression. It was socialism that eventually launched the first spacecraft in human history, Sputnik. It was socialism that launched the first person into outer space, Yuri Gagarin. Don't let anybody ever tell you that socialism does not work. Socialism failed everywhere it's ever been tried. This is not the truth. Great leap forward. It's not the truth. It's not factually accurate. Socialism has had tremendous economic success, and not just in the Soviet Union. One looks just 90 miles south of the United States at Cuba. Compare the way Cubans live on their small island, facing a huge blockade, not able to import medicine, not able to import key supplies they need. But despite everything they're up against, the Cubans have a higher life expectancy than the Haitians and the people of the Dominican Republic, than the Guatemalans, than the Hondurans. The Cubans have built a medical system that is admired all over the world. Ban Ki-moon said that the Cuban medical school was the best medical school in the entire world. That was the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said that. Right? No illiteracy in Cuba. No homelessness in Cuba. Universal employment. The whole country's been industrialized and electrified with socialism. Meanwhile, neoliberalism and free market policies have reduced the people of Haiti to starvation and desperation. Honduras, mass poverty. Guatemala, mass poverty. The Dominican Republic, mass poverty. But Cuba, where they've broken the chains of imperialism, raised itself up and is admired all over the world for its achievements. Cuba sends doctors across the planet. In so many developing countries, people have learned to read and write because of Cuban literacy volunteers. Amazing, dramatic things have been done. And don't let anyone ever tell you socialism doesn't work. This is a lie. It's a complete and utter lie. China today, as a result of socialism, is the largest economy in the world. They have, yes, a lot of free market policies, but at the end of the day, huge state-run industries dominate the economy. Right? The banks are run by the government. There's a 5-year economic plan where the government plans out production. Even private companies are not free to do whatever they want. They are directed by the state. A lot of their major corporations, like Huawei, are technically private cooperatives. Technically private, sure, but at the end of the day, they depend on subsidies from the government. They have military people who direct them. The system of production organized for public good and not profits has been highly successful. It's been a highly, highly successful system around the world. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. So don't let anyone ever tell you that the capitalist system is the only way. Don't let anyone ever tell you that only capitalism works and that, well, we can't have socialism. It just failed everywhere it's ever been tried. Don't let anyone ever tell you that. Don't let anyone ever tell you that. Socialism has been highly successful, and eventually socialism will overtake capitalism. It's only a matter of time.